I'm Teresa.
And I'm Callista, and this is Culprit.
All right, so this week we were going to talk about, I think we mentioned that we watched the movie It's the Woman in Cabin 10, right? And then we wanted to read the second book, which obviously the movie was based on, The Woman in Suite 11.
The movie was based on The Woman in Cabin 10. We just
Yeah.
read the second book with The Woman in Suite 11.
Right. And I think we both thought, or, I don't want to speak for you, that this book was way better than the first because we're big Ruth Ware fans, but just the first one was just not great. We couldn't get into it. The characters weren't, or my opinion, the characters, I don't know, were hard to like, were kind of hard to root for. And I thought, there were still characters that were definitely hard to root for, but I thought that this book was way better than the first.
Oh, definitely. I like this one way better. I don't know, I am not a huge fan of something set on a cruise ship. I think maybe that's my own little idiosyncrasy or issue. But then, no, I didn't like Carrie in the first book. I didn't really love her this time around, but I liked her a little better. And so I think that made a big difference.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I have no desire to go on a cruise, so I do hear you about that. Um, yeah, I kind of liked the fast forward that, Lo has children, she's, married now. Yeah, and I just didn't trust Carrie the whole way through. But yeah, I appreciated the ending. I thought like things were tied up pretty well, and this story I found more interesting than the first one.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily the cruise ship, it's the someone being I guess this is somewhat of a spoiler for the first book, but someone being held, for an extended period of time, that's just not my jam. So, this one obviously didn't have that, so I appreciated that more.
Yeah, that's true. And because, because I didn't trust Carrie and, things that go down in the first book, I'm certainly not a fan of, people being held against their will, but I kept on thinking, like, bad things were going to happen, like, right away, like, is Carrie gonna screw her over, like, immediately? And I was just kind of waiting on that. So, I appreciated, I guess, the twist, like, you know, I was anticipating one thing and that didn't necessarily happen. So, yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, I feel like Carrie's motives this time around were a bit easier to understand, maybe?
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Still not trustworthy, but yeah, I was just I don't wanna give spoilers away, but I was just pretty certain, like, a quarter of the way through, like, things were gonna take a bad turn, and maybe a character was gonna end up in jail or something really bad was going to, happen to them, and that doesn't necessarily happen, so that was good.
Yeah, and if something, bad doesn't happen to a character, it was for a shorter period of time than in the first book.
Yes, yes, maybe that's, like, the big thing.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we mentioned last time around when we talked about the first book, it was really the only one by Ruth where we didn't like. And I would say that this one still, in my opinion, take that for what it's worth, wasn't up to the caliber of others, but I did like it a lot more.
No, I agree with that, and, I get so excited, and probably that should be beaten out of me now, but that when a book is is optioned to be turned into something, I'm so excited, like, "Oh, yay, it's gonna be good, and I'm gonna see it on the screen," and I don't know, this naive part of me thinks they're gonna stick exactly to the book. Anyways, yeah, that didn't happen, obviously. The, first one or the second one, definitely not her best in my opinion, so I always wonder, like, why weren't maybe they will be, but why weren't some of her other books turned into something? But again, maybe since, they never turn out like I hope they will, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I hear that. Maybe it's better that the ones we liked more weren't ruined by their bad adaptation.
Yeah, I just can kind of see, sometimes when you're listening or, actually reading something, I can kind of visualize, what could be happening, but, what goes on in my brain is never it never actually happens on the screen. So you're right, maybe it is better.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay. So, welcome, listeners. This is our 43rd true crime episode, but our first since a little rebrand. We started the podcast, Terrifyingly Typical True Crime, with the intent of diving deeper into a theme in true crime. We covered killer nurses, celebrities killed by fans, daughters who killed their parents, religious leaders who killed their family members, and serial killers from the 90s who targeted gay men. Though we both found this concept interesting, we were itching to delve into cases that don't necessarily fit into a theme.
While researching Gary Ray Bowles for our 90s serial killers who targeted gay men, I started looking at some of the FBI's most famous crimes and criminals and came across serial bomber Walter Leroy Moody Jr., who murdered Judge Robert Vance and civil rights attorney Robert Robinson in 1989. Walter was a piece of work who could not accept the punishment that he was given for a crime he was convicted of and turned that rage into the murder of two innocent men who really did try to make the world a better place.
But Walter just so happened to be one of the many people we hear about who did the opposite.
Exactly, as we will see. Walter was born on March 24th, 1935, in Rex, Georgia, the oldest of three children. He graduated from high school in 1953 and joined the military, where he remained until 1961. After leaving the military, he attended Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, and then enrolled at John Marshall Law School in Atlanta. However, he didn't graduate from either school. After leaving the military and before beginning law school, he had a psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Thomas M. Hall. Dr. Hall would later testify that he was constantly afraid that Walter might get into a situation that would end up in some sort of destruction toward society. And nailing the hammer on the head there, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, spot on. On May 7th, 1972, Hazel, Walter's wife, opened a package she found sitting on her kitchen counter. The package contained a homemade pipe bomb that exploded, tearing up her hand, thigh, and shoulder, and propelling scrap metal into her eye. She required a whopping 6 surgeries due to her injuries.
Now, I know there weren't Post-its in 1972, so he couldn't write a little note saying, "Do not open." But he certainly could have said, "Honey, there's a package on the counter. Make sure you don't open it."
I mean, something like that, my God. Walter was tried for making the bomb with the intent to send it to a local car dealer who had repossessed his car. On October 19th, he was found not guilty of making the bomb, but was convicted of possessing it and sentenced to 5 years in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Shocking no one, Hazel and Walter divorced mere months after his conviction. While behind bars in 1974, Walter filed a motion with the court that he be permitted to purchase a copy of the psychiatrist's deposition that was part of the prosecution's case. The deposition was used in considering a reduction in bond while he was awaiting trial. Since he had already gone to trial and been convicted, the court decided that this deposition would in no way benefit him in any post conviction proceedings, so the motion was denied.
After being released from prison, Walter started a boat equipment company. Then, after taking out life insurance policies totaling more than $2 million on three employees without their knowledge, he allegedly tried to drown them. And it amazes me that this used to be something that people could do. Thankfully, now, if you want to take out a life insurance policy on someone, it requires their express consent and signature.
As it fucking should, it's one hell of a motive.
It sure is. One of the men would testify that when he was returning to the surface after being underwater taking pictures, that Walter stomped on his hand as he was trying to climb the ladder and get back on the boat. There was a 1983 trial, but the jury couldn't reach a decision on Walter's guilt, and prosecutors decided not to retry the case. Being ruthless and litigious, Walter filed lawsuits against his former employees and law enforcement for having the audacity to seek justice. Thankfully, the baseless lawsuit quickly fizzled out. Walter then decided to reinvent himself as a literary consultant. He started an organization he called the Associated Writers Guild of America. For a fee, because literally nothing's free, he offered to publish writers' work in a book called Authors to Watch. The Better Business Bureau received complaints from consumers in 48 states about the organization, which Walter professed was a nonprofit. And I couldn't find any more information on this, but I assume he was forced to close this sham of a business.
We can only hope because while it wasn't profiting the writers, it was sure as hell offering Walter a financial benefit
I mean, people have always been scamming.
that they have.
And I know that you are way too young to have any idea about this, but this reminded me, his little booklet plan reminded me of the who's who among American high schools, which was a booklet marketed to unsuspecting but well meaning parents. A representative of the company that produced the book would say, what an honor it was to have their kid's name in it. Only the best of the best were included, blah, blah, blah. There was no cost to be in the book, but of course, you had to pay to buy the book list for yourself, other family members, whoever you wanted to brag to, really.
That's great. I hadn't heard of that before, but what a racket.
Yeah, right?
During these unsuccessful forays into self employment, Walter was adamant that he hadn't built the bomb that led to his prison sentence. He had deep seated resentment towards the legal system that would only continue to grow. He was fixated on getting his conviction overturned so he would be eligible to pass the bar and practice law. Though in some states you can take the bar without graduating law school, Alabama isn't one of those states. Nonetheless, he was steadfast. Like a dog with a bone, Walter was capital O obsessed with getting his conviction overturned. He hatched a plan to demonstrate his innocence. In his trial, he had tried blaming a Gene Wallace for building the bomb, packaging it, and leaving it on his kitchen counter. He claimed Gene had been attempting to help him regain possession of his car. This went nowhere at trial because Gene Wallace could not be located. Spoiler, Gene Wallace did not exist. Walter now decided he needed a witness to add heft to this defunct story. He bribed Julie Lynn West, an acquaintance who had fallen on hard times, to say that she had information regarding fake Gene. He paid her in small monthly installments as she learned her fabricated story. This unhinged plan also involved Julie's mother, Susan Ekstrom, who would later corroborate the fake story in court.
Walter filed a coram nobis petition in 1986 seeking to overturn his 1972 conviction. Basically, this is a written directive which allows the court to correct errors of fact that weren't included in the original proceedings, such as new evidence that wasn't available at the time of trial but could have changed the outcome. This is most often used when all appeals have been exhausted. A district court denied his petition, and then the 11th Circuit Court affirmed the denial in June of 1989. With the 11th Circuit Court's denial, Walter wrote to the president, George H.W. Bush, for help, but didn't receive any. Really pissed off and not taking no for an answer, Walter and his much younger second wife, Susan McBride Sanford,
It's funny how often that's the case.
so true, began amassing the materials he would need to build bombs. Because nothing says I'm not guilty for building a bomb than planning to build even more bombs.
I mean, proving the authorities correct is really the way to stick it to them,
I mean, but they wronged him, so this is what they deserved.
apparently.
First, Walter constructed a tear gas bomb and mailed it to the Atlanta office of the NAACP. On August 21st, 1989, Regional Director Earl Shinhoster began removing the tape from the package when there was a pop pop sound emanating from the box, and caustic smoke began spilling from the bottom of the box. After the remnants of the package were examined, a 6-inch tear gas canister used by military and police for riot control was found inside. Earl said that the office hadn't received any recent threats or warnings. There was, however, a letter in the box. The letter was addressed to the 11th Circuit Court and was titled Declaration of War. It's not clear why this letter was addressed to the court but sent to the NAACP. 15 people were treated at the scene for breathing issues, along with burning eyes and throats. 8 additional people, including a 4-month-old girl and a 75-year-old man, were treated at local Atlanta hospitals. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured. Most of the people affected by the noxious fumes were patients of the many doctors' offices that shared the building. Democratic representative and civil rights powerhouse John Lewis was speaking at a community event in the neighborhood when he was told about the bomb and went to the scene, telling the media later that when something like this is sent to an organization like the NAACP, your belief is that the reason is racially motivated.
That seems like a reasonable assumption to me. The Postal Service took this incident seriously. Sending hazardous material in the mail is a felony. They began closely monitoring incoming mail at regional NAACP offices. Meanwhile, emboldened by this bombing, Walter began constructing more serious explosive devices in earnest. His target was always the 11th Circuit Court for what he deemed a miscarriage of justice for not overturning his prior conviction. However, to make it look like someone else was behind the bombings, he built 4 deadly bombs, intending to mail them to individuals or organizations that would likely be targeted by a group of people whose history of racism began in the late 1800s. A group of people who were fond of wearing white robes and white hoods, the KKK. Furthering his narrative, Walter mailed letters threatening assassinations in the name of his made up anti Black organization, Americans for a Competent Federal Judicial System, to every judge on the 11th Circuit Court, the editor of the American Bar Association Journal, and Atlanta television news anchor Brenda Wood. On December 16th, 1989, Judge Robert Vance and his wife Helen returned to their home in the suburbs of Birmingham, Alabama. Robert carried in the mail and a package that was wrapped in brown paper with the return address of Judge Vance's colleague, Judge Lewis Morgan. Helen headed to the kitchen and Robert put the items on the kitchen table. Being that Christmas was less than 10 days away, he assumed a gift may be inside the box. Robert pulled the string tied around the box, and the pipe bomb inside exploded, sending shrapnel, including nails, everywhere. 58-year-old Robert was killed instantly, his body thrown across the room. Miraculously, Helen, who sustained severe injuries from nails penetrating her body and even puncturing her liver, survived. U.S. Marshals sent urgent warnings to courthouses nationwide, advising them to be extra vigilant about packages coming into their buildings. The investigation into finding the bomb-making culprit became the largest in the history of law enforcement at that time.
Robert was born in Talladega, Alabama, the youngest of 4 children. He grew up in nearby Birmingham, graduating from Woodlawn High School. He attended and graduated from the University of Alabama with both his BS and JD. After law school, Robert entered the Army where he served as an attorney for JAG, or Judge Advocate General Corps, where he worked at the Pentagon. One of his first assignments was on the team of attorneys defending the Army against charges brought by Senator Joseph McCarthy. Just a little dive into what was known as the Army McCarthy hearings. Loudest person in the room, Wisconsin Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy, surged through the public's consciousness in 1950 with his unfounded allegations that hundreds of communists had infiltrated various departments of the federal government. This fed into the mindset of Americans who were knee deep in the Red Scare. Anti communism was at an all time high. This was during the time when schools taught children to duck and cover, hiding under their desks to help with the effects of a potential atomic bomb. Kind of like active shooter drills now, though the likelihood of that is much, much higher.
But, all we need to do is arm teachers, not, God forbid, put effective regulations in place, and that'll put an end to school shootings.
I mean, I'm pretty sure our forefathers had no idea what America's twisted gun culture would become. In 1953, Senator McCarthy became chairman of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, whose focus had been to investigate fraud and waste in the federal government. However, he took this position as carte blanche to hold numerous hearings, calling hundreds of witnesses to weed out communism. Other members of the committee balked at Senator McCarthy's misuse of his power and left, leaving McCarthy and his chief counsel, Roy Cohn, that Roy Cohn, supposed best friend of Donald Trump, to proceed as they wanted.
In early 1954, Senator McCarthy went after the Army, insinuating lax security at a top secret facility. The Army hit back that the senator had requested special treatment for a recently drafted aide on his committee, and Senator McCarthy did step down as chairman for the 3-month televised spectacle that was the Army McCarthy hearings. Boston attorney Joseph Welch was hired as lead counsel by the Army. On June 9th, Senator McCarthy proposed that one of Attorney Welch's team of attorneys had ties to communism. As Americans watched from their living rooms, Attorney Welch eloquently replied, "Until this moment, Senator, I think I never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness." Senator McCarthy tried again to hurl accusations, but Attorney Welch interrupted, saying, "Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You have done enough. Have you no sense of decency?" After his rebuke, Senator McCarthy's popularity evaporated. He was censured by the Senate, ostracized by his party, and ignored by the media. He died 3 years later at the age of 48. Back to Robert. After his military service, he received a Master of Laws from George Washington University in 1955 and became a law clerk to Alabama Supreme Court Justice James Mayfield. He worked for the U.S. Labor Department for 1 year before entering private practice in Birmingham from 1956 to 1977. Robert wasn't happy with the racism that ran deep in Alabama. As the civil rights movement began to grow, Robert was clearly on the side of equality. He participated in litigation that wound its way through the judicial system, resulting in the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Reynolds versus Sims, which mandated equal representation in legislative districts. Legislatures had to be apportioned on a population basis, not by geographic area. This solidified one person, one vote, requiring that states overhaul their legislative districts to comply, shifting power from overrepresented rural areas to growing urban and suburban centers. Robert was also one of the first attorneys in Birmingham to reject the unwritten agreement amongst lawyers to systematically eliminate all Black members of a jury pool to ensure an all-white jury would be seated.
Robert also served as chairman of the Alabama Democratic Party from 1966 to 1977, aligning with the National Party and not the racist, segregationist piece of shit Democrat in name only Governor George Wallace. Throughout his tenure as chairman, with warring factions of those that were loyal to the National Party and those loyal to the governor, Robert was able to keep the organization from the grips of the state's racist leader.
Go, Robert, for standing on the right side of history.
Yeah, at a time when it was much, much harder to do so.
Yeah.
Robert was also a lecturer at the Cumberland School of Law at Samford University and spent a number of years as a reservist with the Army. On November 4th, 1977, President Jimmy Carter nominated Robert to a seat on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He was confirmed on December 15th. At that time, the jurisdiction of the Fifth Circuit included 6 southern states. In 1981, the Fifth Circuit was divided into 2 circuits. So on October 1st, 1981, Robert was reassigned to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, overseeing cases from Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. In 1990, the federal building and courthouse in Birmingham was renamed in honor of Judge Vance. The Atlanta chapter of the Federal Bar Association hosts an annual forum on the Bill of Rights, named the Robert S. Vance Forum. In 2006, Judge Vance was inducted into Alabama Lawyers Hall of Fame.
Of course, none of this makes his murder any less horrific, but I'm glad he has such a legacy to be remembered by.
Yeah, I think so too. One day after Judge Vance's murder, a security guard at the 11th Circuit Court in Atlanta, taking the U.S. Marshal's warning seriously, noticed something odd when scanning a package. There was an 8-inch cube with 2 batteries attached to the side. The batteries are a telltale sign of a pipe bomb. Investigators didn't want the bomb detonated. Instead, they wanted it dismantled so they could study its construction. Experts determined that the bomb was identical to the one that killed Judge Vance. There were two things that really stuck out as unique. First, the entire inside of the box had been sprayed with black paint to destroy any trace evidence, which it did. There were no fingerprints, hair, or fibers of any kind detected. Second, the square end caps were welded to the box. This would delay explosions so the box could successfully be mailed. Investigators also felt the construction of these two bombs were similar to the tear gas bomb that had been sent to the NAACP. Investigators now believed that the tear gas bomb was sent as a test to see if a bomb could be successfully sent through the mail without exploding.
A day later, on December 18th, attorney Robert Robinson arrived at his Savannah law office. Waiting on his desk was a package. When he opened it, it exploded. Robert was rushed to the hospital, but 3 hours later, he died from his injuries. Robert was born on July 30th, 1947, in Savannah, Georgia. He started school early, enrolling in kindergarten at age 4 and entering first grade at 5. In 1963, when Robert was 16, he was part of a group of Black students who enrolled in Savannah High School, a formerly all-white school during the integration of the city schools. He also participated in the NAACP's organized wade-in event to desegregate the beach at Tybee Island near Savannah. This event was part of the Savannah protest movement, whereby civil rights activists protested in an effort to end racial segregation, as they had been subject to Jim Crow laws that entailed a strict system of racial segregation, which prohibited them from using many of the same facilities used by white people. This movement led to the abolishment of these archaic and cruel laws on October 1st, 1963. Robert graduated the next year and enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, where he was a military policeman. He left the Air Force in 1968 and enrolled at Savannah State University, where he studied accounting. While at Savannah State, he met and married a friend of his sister, Vivian Cook. Robert graduated magna cum laude in 1971, completing his undergrad degree in 3 years. He then received a scholarship to attend the Lumpkin Law School at the University of Georgia, becoming one of the first 3 African Americans to enroll at the law school. Robert graduated in 1974 and worked for several years at the Georgia Legal Services Program in Atlanta, which provides free civil legal services to low-income Georgians. In 1975, he joined the city's first integrated law firm.
Robert returned to Savannah in 1976, where he worked as an associate attorney, became partner at another firm, and finally went into solo practice in 1981. In addition to his clients at the law firm, he also served as legal counsel for the local NAACP and was appointed chairman of the Savannah Transportation Authority. In 1982, Robert threw his hat into the ring and ran for city council. His opponent, Joe Bell, a banker, was financed by Savannah's white elite.
Why am I not surprised?
I mean, too true. Even though his opponent was able to outspend him, Robert easily defeated him, becoming one of 3 African Americans on the 9-member council. He was reelected to the city council with 82% of the vote in 1986.
Good for him.
Yeah. In his memory, a parking garage, public park, and apartment building in Savannah were all named after him. Additionally, a scholarship in his name exists to aid students applying to Savannah State University or the University of Georgia. In 2023, a historical marker honoring Robert was erected at Cann Park within the boundary of the district he represented as a city council member.
Again, his murder is still as sickening as ever, but I'm happy that he'll continue to be honored for his impressive life's work.
Yeah, I think so too. The same day that Robert was murdered, Wiley Dennis, the president of the NAACP office in Jacksonville, Florida, returned to her office after a meeting to grab some items before leaving again. She noticed a package sitting on her desk, but she was running late, so she left the package unopened. At home later that night, she received a call from a friend telling her about Robert's murder and warning her about opening any suspicious parcels.
I mean, thank God for her friend.
Yeah, definitely. The following day, Wiley called the sheriff's office, who removed the package. Explosive experts opened and verified that the box contained a pipe bomb. There were also letters inside the box. Not sure how these would have survived a detonation, but I mean, what do I know?
I mean, the only thing I can think of is that he got off on the idea of authorities trying to piece the possible scraps together to figure out what he had written.
I mean, that's a good point. One of the letters took responsibility for the deaths of Judge Vance and Attorney Robinson. Another letter referenced the tear gas bomb and threatened members of the NAACP with assassination. The last letter alluded to the rape and murder of Julie Love, stating, "Anytime a Black man rapes a white woman in Alabama, Florida, or Georgia, in the future, Americans for a competent federal judicial system shall assassinate one federal judge, one attorney, and one officer of the NAACP."
Walter had been consumed with trying to get his conviction overturned since his release from prison more than 20 years earlier. He did, however, have room in his vengeful life to also become obsessed with something else: the murder of Julie Love. Julie was last seen by her fiance on the morning of July 11th, 1988. When he couldn't get in touch with her that night or the next morning, he contacted the police. The police did nothing until Julie's car was found abandoned and out of gas less than a mile from her fiance's home. The police had no body and no leads until August, when 34-year-old Janice Weldon, feeling a bit safer now that her on again, off again boyfriend, Emmanuel Hammond, was in jail for trying to strangle her, went to the police with information on Julie's disappearance. She told them that Emmanuel and his 19-year-old cousin, Maurice Porter, were responsible for her disappearance. Police had her wear a body bug so they could monitor conversations between her and Maurice, who made several incriminating statements. Maurice was arrested, confessed that he had been with his cousin the night Julie was murdered, and led police to skeletal remains, which Julie's dentist confirmed were hers. Both Janice and Maurice testified for the prosecution at Emmanuel's trial. They testified that on the evening of July 11th, Janice and Emmanuel were in the car while Maurice drove around the Tony Buckhead area of Atlanta. They saw Julie walking, and at Emmanuel's command, Maurice pulled over and asked her if she wanted to ride. Julie declined, pointing to a nearby house and saying she lived there. She began walking up the driveway, and they drove away.
However, before they got out of sight, Emmanuel saw her turn around in the driveway and walk back to the road. Emmanuel demanded Maurice turn around. He complied. He sped up and stopped next to Julie. Emmanuel, with a sawed-off shotgun in hand, jumped out of the car, grabbed Julie, and pushed her into the car. They drove to nearby Grove Park Elementary School, where Emmanuel searched her purse, grabbing her bank's ATM card and demanding her PIN. He ordered Maurice and Janice to drive to the nearest bank and withdraw cash. Emmanuel, pointing the gun at Julie, pulled her out of the car. Janice and Maurice soon returned with no money and no ATM card. The PIN was incorrect. They tried several variations, but the ATM machine took the card. Emmanuel, incensed, repeatedly beat Julie with the shotgun. Then Maurice raped her. Julie pleaded for her life and told her captors that she had more bank cards at home. They drove to her apartment, but seeing a security guard at the entrance, didn't enter. They turned away from the apartment, and Janice told them to take her home. Maurice obeyed and dropped Janice off at her apartment. He then headed towards the Grove Park neighborhood.
When they got close to a wooded area, Emmanuel told Maurice to stop the car. Emmanuel pulled Julie from the car. Holding the gun to her, he led her towards the trees. Maurice remained behind the wheel. He heard a gunshot, and a few minutes later, Emmanuel returned with blood splattered across his face. Janice said that Emmanuel returned home early the next morning, and when she asked him what had happened to Julie, he told her he blew the side of her face off, dumped her body in a trash pile, and covered her with some wooden boards. Emmanuel had kidnapped at least 3 other women and robbed or attempted to rob them. He stabbed one of these women numerous times and also left her for dead on a trash pile in a wooded area, but thankfully she survived. Emmanuel was sentenced to death and was executed in January of 2011. Maurice was convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences. The cases were tried in Atlanta's 11th Circuit Court. Though the Julie Love case is horrific and tragic, it had nothing to do with Walter. By alluding to her case in one of his many letters, he believed that he successfully and clearly placed the blame for the bombs elsewhere. Investigators were confident that all the bombs were related. The first obvious connection was that both Judge Vance and Attorney Robinson, along with the NAACP, were all involved in civil rights. That connection turned out not to be the whole story, but a diversion. Walter really felt like he was the smartest person in every room and would be able to direct authorities so far away from him that he would never be caught.
Walter had sent approximately 30 threatening letters to civil rights groups, federal judges, and news organizations. The letters, along with the mailing labels, had all been typed with the same typewriter. How did they know this? The number 1 did not match the typeface of the other keys. It had been replaced. Authorities, hoping this was the lead that they needed, searched the files at the 11th Circuit Court looking for any document that had been typed using the same typewriter. More than 1 million documents were examined. Investigators found one letter that may have been typed with the same typewriter. The number 1 did not match the typeface of the other characters. The letter was regarding a life insurance case from 1987. The sender, Robert Wayne O'Farrell, was alive and well and lived in the small town of Enterprise, Alabama. Robert was a junk dealer and therefore had a warehouse full of items. Federal agents searched every inch of his home, garage, and warehouse. They even excavated his septic system, but couldn't find the typewriter. Not sure how it would have been there, but whatevs. Robert remembered typing the letter, but couldn't remember what he had done with the typewriter. His daughter did have a vague memory of selling it to a woman about a year earlier. However, she couldn't remember any details about the woman and didn't have a receipt of the sale. All this effort and the search for the typewriter became a dead end.
Obviously, investigators have to follow every viable lead, but how disheartening to end up with nothing.
Definitely.
Investigators pivoted to focusing all their energy on the bombs. Pictures of the bombs were taken and distributed to bomb experts throughout the country. The responses were the same. No one had ever seen a bomb constructed this way. That's until Frank Lee with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms got a call from colleague Lloyd Irwin, a chemical analyst. Lloyd recalled the same bomb design from years earlier, with a rod through the center and the same square end caps. He remembered the bomb because of its uniqueness. Lloyd searched thousands of case files all the way back to 1972 and learned that the bomb he had remembered had accidentally maimed a woman who found the bomb in her home. Authorities were certain the bomb had been constructed by her husband. Though he vehemently denied this, he was convicted and spent 3 years of his 5-year sentence in the same penitentiary. Authorities had zero forensic evidence linking Walter to the bombs. But after interviewing over 6,000 people, searching through 1 million documents, and examining every case file of every bombing in the United States, the FBI was convinced that Walter was the serial bomber. Federal agents searched the home Walter shared with his wife Susan. They used their specialized forensic vacuum in every nook and cranny of the house, but found no trace evidence. Retired FBI agent Bill Henshaw said they found no bomb-making material. But what was odd was that the forensics team found no evidence in the entire home or garage. It was like everything had been sterilized. Investigators did gain valuable evidence when they questioned the much younger Susan alone. She told them that her husband was emotionally and physically abusive. She also told them that Walter would take her to various hardware and variety stores throughout the southeastern United States. sometimes coming into the store with her, sometimes not, telling her exactly what to purchase. These items included steel pipes, tubing, disposable protective clothing, rubber gloves, safety glasses, and black spray paint. Investigators believed that Walter dressed himself head to toe in protective gear while making the bombs so as not to leave any genetic material behind.
Susan also confirmed that she had purchased a used typewriter for Walter, but like the bomb making components, it had been thrown away. Now, for some real CSI competency and attention to detail, a fingerprint had been found on one of the letters sent with the bombs. Susan told the FBI that she had copied the letters at a small store in Florence, Kentucky. When the self serve copier ran out of paper, a worker put more paper in the machine, leaving his fingerprint on the top piece of paper. When Susan resumed copying, the employee's fingerprint was visible on the paper. Agents tracked down the worker still employed at the store, took his fingerprints, and lo and behold, they matched the print on the letter.
Who doesn't appreciate a satisfying CSI moment?
It's true. This information confirms Susan's story. This link, along with the fact that the boxes that contained the bombs were also purchased at the store, was what investigators needed to tie Walter to the bombs. Walter was arrested on July 13th, 1990, and held without bail. He was indicted by a grand jury on November 7th. After all of the circuit and district judges in Georgia and Alabama voluntarily recused themselves, Supreme Court Chief Justice William Rehnquist designated Judge Edward DeWitt of the District of Minnesota to preside over the case. Judge DeWitt granted Walter's motion for a change of venue, and the trial was held in Minnesota beginning on June 4th, 1991. The prosecution granted Susan immunity to testify against Walter. The defense floated the idea that Susan's only motive for testifying was to stay out of jail. This didn't work since her testimony was corroborated by forensic science.
As usual, the defense didn't have a lot to work with, but it is nice when their pathetic arguments are quickly swatted away.
It is. Prosecutors argued that the target of the bombs and all of Walter's rage had always been to kill a judge on the 11th Circuit Court. Apparently, any judge would do because Judge Vance was not on the panel that denied his motion to overturn his conviction. They intimated that the other bombings were to stoke racial tensions and place the blame elsewhere.
FBI explosive expert Special Agent James T. Thurman testified that the four package bombs, along with the 1972 bomb, were made by the same person. On February 15th, 1990, federal agents recovered a pipe bomb at a basement apartment in Chamblee rented by Walter. The court referenced this bomb as the Chamblee device. Agent Thurman stated that this bomb appeared to be a transitional device between the bomb Walter built in 1972 and the 1989 bombs. During the second week of the government's case, Walter's lawyers, Edward Tolley and Donald Samuel, met ex parte, which basically means they met with the judge without the prosecuting attorneys. But they did have the government's attorney's consent to do so. Walter's attorneys explained that their client was insisting on testifying despite their repeated efforts to dissuade him. They told the judge that they didn't know what his eventual testimony would be, and they advised the court that they could not accurately state that Walter's testimony would not constitute perjury.
I mean, I wonder how narcissistic you have to be to believe that you're smarter than your lawyers and you will simply ignore their advice.
About as narcissistic as you'd have to be to represent yourself, I'd say.
Good point.
Attorney Tolley further stated that he strongly believed that Walter's testimony would be inconsistent with the defense's case as it had been conducted to that point, that his testimony might be used against him in subsequent state prosecutions, and that his testimony was not advisable. The judge questioned Walter, who assured the court that he had made a considered decision to testify and that he had received contrary advice from his attorneys.
The court directed Attorney Tolley to call Walter as a witness and, at his attorney's request, permitted the testimony to proceed in narrative form. This most commonly happens when a client has told their attorney one thing and the attorney has argued the case based on this information, only to realize later that the client has decided to change the story and possibly commit perjury on the stand. This form of testimony means that the defendant does not answer questions directly, but states what happened in more of a storytelling format.
It's like they're using the format to acknowledge that it's fictional.
It is. Walter's testimony spanned 4 days, and because his story was so incredibly unbelievable, it was damaging to him. During his time on the stand, Walter again contested his 1972 conviction, sticking to the story that the fictitious Gene Wallace had placed the bomb in his home. He testified that the experiments he was conducting in his basement apartment were his attempts to replicate the recent cold fusion experiment and that the Chambly device was a homemade assembly for a paint spray gun. A professor of physics testified that Walter's claim regarding cold fusion made no sense. A former paint shop operator testified that the Chambly device could not be used as a paint spray gun.
I mean, I'm no expert, but I feel like a bomb is a bit different from a paint spray gun.
I sure think so. Walter went on to testify that he had never heard of Judge Vance or Robert Robinson, and that his former attorney, because he went through several, Michael Ford, who had been Attorney Robinson's law partner at one time, had admitted to his own involvement in the mail bombings. This was total BS. Furthering his sham of a narrative, Walter said that he did not arrive in the Atlanta area where the packages were mailed from until 10:30 p.m. on December 16th, 1989. So he could not have mailed the bombs. Contradicting this, a former gas station attendant testified that her initials were on a gas receipt signed by Walter sometime before 2:40 p.m. on December 16th in Griffin, Georgia, which is about an hour outside Atlanta, directly disputing his alibi story. The government called 15 witnesses in a single day of rebuttal testimony. Michael Ford took the stand and vehemently denied having anything to do with the mail bombings. Two witnesses, Walter's former employees from his boating business, responding to Walter's claims to be nonviolent, testified that he had attempted to murder them.
Walter Leroy Moody Jr. was sentenced on August 20th, 1991 to 7 federal life terms plus 400 years on 71 related charges. In 1997, he was sentenced to death by the Alabama Circuit Court for the death of Judge Robert Vance. These sentences were to be served consecutively to a sentence previously imposed in the Middle District of Georgia for Walter's obstruction of justice in attempting to overturn his 1972 conviction. Months after the federal trial ended, the Alabama grand jury indicted Walter on 2 counts of capital murder for the death of Judge Vance and 1 count of assault in the first degree for injuries suffered by Helen Vance. Walter represented himself at his state trial. In October 1996, the jury found him guilty and recommended a sentence of death. He was sentenced to death by electric chair in 1997 and entered death row on February 13th, 1997. Because Walter's second murder victim, Attorney Robinson, was a local official rather than a federal one, his case was a state action rather than a federal action. Walter was represented by counsel for this trial. At the beginning, Walter often loudly spoke out of turn and attempted to create disruptions. But as the trial was winding down, he decided to keep his mouth shut, ignoring the proceedings altogether while sitting at the defense table reading a paperback. Walter was convicted of the murder, but since the federal case superseded the state's case and he was already sentenced to death, a separate sentence was not issued. Litigious as he was, Walter filed numerous appeals. He often, no surprise here, acted as his own attorney. He filed a writ of habeas corpus because he believed he was being held unlawfully. Along with other unfounded complaints, he contended that the district court had violated his Sixth Amendment right to counsel by allowing him to testify contrary to his attorney's wishes. These complaints were all denied.
Walter continued to lament that he was framed and always maintained his innocence. Weeks before his scheduled execution, Walter sent a letter to Judge Vance's son. In the rambling letter, he claimed that he was an innocent victim of a government conspiracy with all the gall of a mediocre white man. He wrote, "Had my dad been murdered, I would want to know who had done it." Robert Vance Jr., who is currently a judge on Alabama's 10th Circuit Court, threw the letter in the trash. He said he had to make peace with his father's death, but there was no doubt in his mind that Walter Moody was guilty.
Too right.
With no final meal and no last words, on April 19th, 2018, in Atmore, Alabama, at the William C. Holman Correctional Facility, Walter Moody took his final breath, having been executed via lethal injection. Walter has the distinction at 83 years old of being the oldest inmate to be executed in the United States.
It's not like he deserved to be remembered for something better.
That's true. Next time, we'll be discussing the case of Graham Young, also known as the teacup poisoner.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case for us to discuss, you can email us at culpritpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at culpritthepod on Instagram and at culpritpodcast on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you soon.